All right, today we're going to dig into a 2,700-year-old story about leadership, excuses, and a very, very ill-advised fishing trip that, believe it or not, has a lot to teach us. I mean, it sounds a little strange, right? But what if a leader's hobby could actually signal their downfall? What if his seemingly trivial choice was the first real sign of a much, much deeper problem? And no, this is not just some dusty old fable. This story comes from classical Chinese history, and you know what? It holds some incredibly sharp lessons for pretty much anyone in a leadership position today.
Okay, so let's set the scene for this pretty unusual historical moment.
So we're in ancient China. The year is 1718 BCE during the Zhou dynasty. And you gotta understand, this was a time when rules, rituals, and a leader's public duties were, well, they were everything. There's this saying from the time that the rules were bigger than the sky. That's the kind of world we're stepping into. All right, so who are the main players here? First up, we've got Duke Yin. You can think of him as the acting CEO of the state of Lu, which was a really respected and principled place. And then there's his advisor, Zang Xibo. He's basically the head of compliance, the guy whose job it is to make sure the Duke is following all those super strict rules of leadership. So the whole thing kicks off when Duke Yin hears about this amazing fishing spectacle happening in a border town called Tang, and he decides he absolutely has to go see it. Now, here's the problem. A ruler's time was considered sacred. It was all strictly scheduled for super important state duties, things like rituals or military strategy. It was definitely not for personal entertainment. So Zang Xibo, our head of compliance, he jumps right in. He basically tells the Duke, look, watching people fish, that's the job of fishermen, of lower officials. Your job is the big picture, it's strategy. Going to watch some fishing isn't just a waste of time, it would literally damage the brand image of our whole state. And this is the crucial moment. The Duke, he's been called out, right? But he doesn't just admit he wants to have some fun. No. Instead, he comes up with this really flimsy excuse. He's like, oh, no, I'm not going to see the fish. I'm going to inspect the border. Yeah, right. And, spoiler alert, he totally ignores the advice and goes anyway. Absolutely not. This ancient tale is a perfect case study for some very, very modern leadership failures. It's about so much more than just a fishing trip. So the first big lesson here is all about how a leader can misuse their most valuable resource, their time. This brings us to this fascinating concept called strategic laziness. So what is that? It's when a leader looks really busy. They're doing stuff, they're active, but what they're really doing is focusing on all these small, easy tasks to avoid the much, much harder work of big picture strategy and making tough decisions. And the deep logic here is that a leader's time is the single most expensive asset an organization has. So when a CEO is busy, say, personally correcting the font on a PowerPoint slide, or in this case, watching fishermen, they are actively avoiding their real job. They're using what looks like diligence to cover up for being strategically lazy. But the Duke's actions didn't just waste his own time. Oh no, they basically poisoned the well for everyone else, and that leads to something really dangerous, an excuse culture. The Duke's excuse, inspecting the border, it's just an ancient version of something we see all the time today, right? Just think of a manager who tries to package their personal vacation as a mandatory team-building exercise, just so the company will pay for it. Everybody sees right through it, and it just feels, well, gross. And when a leader starts making these kinds of fake, disingenuous excuses, the consequences are always severe. Trust just evaporates. Credibility completely collapses, cynicism starts to spread like a virus, and pretty soon the actual rules start to feel totally meaningless. All right, finally, this story has a brilliant lesson. And it's not just for leaders, but for anyone, and I mean anyone, who's ever had to give difficult advice to someone in power. This is exactly why Zang Xibo failed, even though he was 100% correct. He used a really ineffective method. He just argued based on the rules. A much, much more effective approach is to give the person a face-saving way out, a better reason to do the right thing. See, the goal of persuasion isn't really to prove someone is wrong. It's about giving them an off-ramp. If Zang Xibo had said something like, "My lord, the border is actually unstable right now," he would have given the Duke a perfectly valid reason to cancel the trip, and he still would have looked like a strong, decisive leader. So after all this,
What is the big warning this 2,700-year-old story has for all of us today?
Well, the ancient text that actually records this story, the Zhou, offers this absolutely chilling conclusion. It says the moment a leader starts looking for legitimate excuses to satisfy their own private desires, that's the exact moment the Great Decline begins. That's when the rot starts to set in. It's the very first step in a total collapse of principles, trust, and order.
And that leaves a question for all of us, right? Not just for CEOs or dukes. What small, harmless excuse are you using today to maybe avoid your real responsibilities?